Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this network chat. I'll invite partners from the Digital Library of Georgia now to talk to us more about their learnings and their work on updating our harmful statement for the Black Women's Suffrage Project and larger DPLA project and how they amended and adjusted it for their local context in Georgia.
Okay, well, thanks, Shanae. Hi, I'm Sheila McAlister. I am the director of the DLG, and I have with me my colleague, Nicole Lawrence, who is our assistant director. And I'm gonna talk to you a little, we're gonna talk to you, I should say, a little bit about how we made our harmful content statement more understandable by the general public. Another thing to note is that Nicole is the co-chair of the Metadata Working Group and actually had was on the committee when the harmful content statement was drafted. So she has some perspective into that process. So like many of you, we've been working with our partners to adjust the harmful content statement based on the example that came from the women's suffrage site and then the overall network approved statement. And we went through various levels of approval. We included some of our major partners, such as the Georgia Public Library Service, New Georgia Encyclopedia, Galileo, which is sort of our mother organization, and others in vetting the early drafts of our statement. And as we were nearing sort of the final hurdle, we passed it along to the executive director of Galileo, Lucy Harrison, who in reviewing it was very prescient and said, you know, this is really academic. Who's your audience? And that's when we really realized that you know, we have a skewed perception of what the general public's understanding and reading comprehension level is. And if we are serving the general public and in particular K-12, it was really important that we made our statement more understandable to them. So we began a little bit of research to sort of figure out in Georgia what tools does K-12 use to determine Lexile or reading level, and they use the Lexile tool, which looks at the vocabulary and also looks at sentence syntax or semantic syntax to determine a readability level. And on this slide, you can see that a screenshot of the tool. So with the tool, you load your text in, and then it will give you an appropriate, it will tell you what the reading or Lexile level is. There are certain, because it uses punctuation, there are certain kinds of things that you're not supposed to put in, like lyrics, poetry, and the like. So what we did was we went through sort of paragraph by paragraph with our statement and looked at it to try and determine what the Lexile level of each paragraph was. And we used the Georgia Department of Education's guide as Lexile levels by grade as sort of our goal. So we were really looking to get in that 8th grade college and career ready sort of stretch band of 110L to 1185L. So we were able to do that using the tool. Some of the things that it looks at are the number of words in a sentence, sentence structure, and it also looks at vocabulary. So as much as possible, we tried to simplify vocabulary where we could. So if you take a look here, on the left, you can see our original statement. And then on the right, you can see our simplified language. So there was a lot of, as you can see, a lot of difference in this. I would say that it has really made us reflect on our forward-facing writing. So we've decided internally within the Digital Library of Georgia that for anything that is public-facing for the general audience, so this would not include our documentation site for our partner, that we are going forward, we'll analyze it using the Lexile tool, and we'll again go for that band that has been identified by our State Department of Education for 8th grade. So my slides are a little out of order, so give me a second. So there are a number of other states that have contracts with Lexile, and the ones in the blue have contracts. So at a state Board of Education level. For the ones in gray, those measures are available often at the local level. So you may or may not have access to the tool. As educators in Georgia, we have access to the tool for free. And we're able to do up to 50 tests a month. So Nicole, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I will say that this was a really interesting experience for me in particular, because I was on the committee, the DPLA committee, while drafting those original statements. The original version, which the links are in the chat, of our statement is very heavily based on the current DPLA statement. And when Sheila did most of the editing work on this, and when she was like, hey, what do you think of this version? I won't lie, because I put so much time and effort into it, and we thought we were drafting an accessible statement. It took me by surprise how different it was. But I think that it's a lot more frank, which is the point. It's a lot easier to digest. I think that there are definitely things for different institutions or different organizations, the way you would have to tailor or modify what your statements or anything that you're analyzing really depends on the context and who you're trying to reach. It was a very interesting exercise, and it continues to be as we're running text through it. It's a good reality check on how to communicate. I will say that.
So I would be really interested to hear what others have done to make their the language on their sites more comprehensible, and sort of thoughts on the sort of model that we propose. I believe you can unmute yourself and speak if you'd like.
I would also say, I mean, well, I don't know if Sheila wants this, but we'd welcome comments on the drafts that y'all are looking at. If you are curious why we made certain choices. I know this is a thing that I brought to the Metadata Working Group and showed off what we had done, and there have been conversations about potentially doing some work, DPLA work on this, but that has not been decided, and so I won't speak for any upcoming changes to any current statements.
Also, if you're shy and you don't want to talk, please feel free to drop something into the chat.
I'm curious, has anybody considered reading levels? This was the first time that anyone had mentioned it to us when we were putting out any sort of public document. So it's honestly the first time we ever considered doing an analysis like this.
I will add also that the Lexile number is not the only kind of reading comprehension tool that you can use. If you are in a state that doesn't have access to the tool and you don't want to pay the subscription cost, there is a tool, a readability assessment tool in Word. You find it within the on the review tab. It's a little hard to find, frankly. It also it will assign a grade level, and it seems to skew a little higher than the Lexile one does. So we had, but obviously, given that this is sort of what our state's Department of Education is using, we felt like Lexile was the better choice for us.
So Sheila, it looks like you have a comment. I haven't done much of this work in a formal way, but the reading level sounds interesting. Do you know what the Word tool relies on?
So Lexile has a sort of dictionary of about 600,000 words, and it compares them to those. Word frequency is also considered as well. And it looks like we've got a couple more.
We do. I'm gonna jump in for a second though and say it is Word with a capital W. So I'm wondering if the question is about Microsoft Word and not the Lexile Analyzer.
Oh, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Do you know what the Word tool relies on? So I'm thinking Microsoft Word.
Oh, I can't remember what it is. It begins, I believe, with a K. It's been a while.
Have you all used this method to change public-facing language that might have legal implications or that need to be approved by legal counsel, e.g. takedown policies?
No, we have not. I think that when we get to that point, I have a good relationship with our counsel, and so I think that he and I would probably come to some kind of agreement to sort of meet both our needs. I know with legal things, precision is incredibly important, and it may be more difficult to do that. So that's a great question.
I do wonder if it would be, if it could be something we used in terms of, say, the subgranting partnership agreements or things that are not actually like a legally binding document, but are some sort of memorandum of understanding between us and a partner. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that we would still need to pass those by our legal counsel, but so we have a
Okay.
couple.
Yeah,
more.
next, does the word capital W function point out areas in the text that could be made more readable? Do you happen to know that?
It doesn't. It just gives you a score. So the way that I figured it out was by shortening sentences. I would do a paragraph and I would re-edit it and then run it again. And unfortunately, it just gives you a number.
Next, I noticed a few words that have specific meanings have been removed. Misogynoir and postmodern photography have been removed, with replacing them with equivalent words. How do you feel about the loss of meaning?
How do I feel? So I feel like that if our users need to go and use a dictionary to find out what a word means, then we're not communicating successfully with them. I realize that there is a balance between precision and understanding. I was concerned about that the changes that we made would make the statement less effective. So I did, Nicole and I did have conversations about that. We did keep some, I would say 50-cent words in there, like xenophobia, because I really couldn't come up with a succinct and clear way of describing what that is.
All right, next, I'm curious how the editing process went. Did you just edit each paragraph and reanalyze until you had it at the reading level you were aiming for? Did it take multiple tries before you got it right?
So that's kind of the way that I approached it. The most important part of the statement for us, I mean, it's all important, but we really wanted what I guess we would call the preamble, what we called internally the preamble, to be the most understandable of all. And so I think what happened really was that as time went on, I sort of figured out how to edit in a way that lowered the Lexile level. So having less, all the pretty things that we like to do with our text, like, gerunds and, all of those things. Those some of those things I had to take out. And really try to be terse and have simple sentence structure.
Yeah, I will say it's interesting to kind of pull out and add back in things and try to keep the original intent of your sentence while making sure that it's accessible. I mean, if we are pointing this at an 8th grade reading level, there's a lot that won't, you can't get through that filter that does call out specific context and instances of things that you might come across. And so it's really interesting to walk that line between what makes it more accessible and if you're conveying enough information. I will also say, aside from content, one of the things that the Lexile Analyzer in general doesn't do well with is titles and headings of things. So titles and headings all have to be stripped out when you're doing this sort of work, which is one of the reasons that paragraph by paragraph worked, although paragraph by paragraph is much easier to work on anyway. So.
Did we consult with any of the kinds of people who might have been affected by the harmful content? We did not. I think that our view was that it had been vetted, or our model had been vetted by DPLA, and DPLA had some outside reviewers. And I think, you know, that's probably something we should have done in retrospect.
To clarify, DPLA, we did not have outside reviewers of the harmful language statement. We had outside reviewers for the exhibits and timeline and key suffragists that we added for the Black women's suffrage site. And what's really interesting about, you know, this tool for me is that we often build library collections without considering our users. And this tool, while it doesn't include, you know, the kind of product design user interviews, this tool does provide us a way to draft a statement that takes into account all of the different reading levels and the general 6th grade reading level of most of the citizens of our country. So I think that's really important. However, with the Metadata Working Group, we haven't, like Nicole said, decided how we move forward with changes to the larger DPLA statement. But I personally think that we could do some user testing in this area to check our assumptions.
Yeah, so Adrian is asking if we were going to do this on other parts of our site. We have started, certainly it will happen with any of our educator resources kinds of materials, and we participate in the National Digital Newspaper Program, and part of that process includes writing newspaper history essays. And on our historic newspaper site, we have also done that as well. And we are looking to hire a graduate student to edit our essays for 2 things. One is for sort of that conscious editing, and the other is for the Lexile level. So those essays will be in sort of a you know, we'll hit that 8th grade target level. So Kayla, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in journalism?
Yeah, sure. I was in high school, I was the yearbook editor and I was a member of the newspaper staff, and I started studying journalism in college and changed to history. But the classes that I did take, they do tell you to write at an 8th grade level because newspapers are aimed at the general public. However, it never occurred to me to do that in my library career, but it makes more sense because we work with the general public. It's just usually the things that I write are geared more towards other professionals and not necessarily towards the general public, although this is, some of it is, and I've never thought to apply that. In doing, in writing in college and in high school for newspapers, it was definitely challenging for me because I had, up until that point, always been like coached to use bigger words and write more intellectually. And it's like, you have to retrain yourself to think, is this word accessible to other people? And I like the vocabulary that you used here in terms of, if you have to look it up in a dictionary, it's not accessible. So I think that is a very good way to think about it. And I think maybe having some feedback from your users would be helpful here, because I find even when having other professionals review work like this, they're not necessarily viewing it in that lens. Or even, this is more personal, but I have lots of conversations with my husband where I don't understand words he's using. He comes from a different socioeconomic background than I do. I come from a much poorer background than he does. So he's not thinking that I won't understand the words that he's using. Very often I will have to ask him to explain what word he just used in a sentence. So I think sometimes we get stuck in our own mindset of like, well, I understand this word. So it is interesting to think about how to get that perspective if you're not seeking feedback. These tools are great. But yeah, those are my thoughts on it. It really isn't much different from what you were talking about. Like, it's just rethinking, reframing how the approach to the way that you're forming your sentences and the words that you're using.
Yeah, and I think many of us are in academic libraries, and so we're used to writing in an academic way. And you know, I don't have a journalism background, and so it didn't really occur to me that this, I had always heard that 8th grade level was what journalists try to go for, but I had no idea how to actually get there. And I think this is part of it sort of demonstrates the value of working with different kinds of people and different kinds of information professionals, because you know, talking to Lucy, who is in charge of a consortium that consists of public libraries and school media specialists and those kinds of things, she was really keyed into Lexile Level, which was really not something that we had considered.
Yeah, I will say this is definitely, the suggestions are wonderful. And Sheila, before I forget, I will say, I wonder with our latest migration effort, if that would be a good opportunity to get some user feedback, since we're going to be user testing features for that anyway. But I will say it's been a shift for us in thinking, because in the hub environment, we were focused so much on talking to the professionals and training other professionals. And Sheila has done great over the past few years about reaching out and getting involved with National History Day efforts in Georgia and the Department of Education. So we're kind of shifting who we talk to and learning along the way. So we're definitely still in the learning and trying to figure it out phase.
there's a nice comment in the chat from Kristen at Recollection, Wisconsin. Kristen, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I can. Can you hear me okay? I haven't used my microphone today.
Yep, you're great.
Yeah, I mean, just what I said here is that we've been revamping our digital projects toolkit, and we send out pieces of it or a worksheet or all kinds of stuff. And every time we send something out, we hear back so consistently that people ask us to define technical terms and jargon and acronyms, and they ask us to like make the language more accessible, because it's not just professionals that we're sharing this information with. It's not just professionals that we're asking to be, you know, content partners and do digital projects that are shared through DPLA. So, you know, maybe it's a little lofty of me to think of it this way, but it does feel a little bit like we're democratizing the knowledge, you know, in that way, if we're making it easy to understand for people who are not in an academic setting.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that one thing that we have decided to do with our sort of training is to actually have slightly different training, especially as relates to metadata for different kinds of audiences. So we might have for folks in the information professions, we might cover different topics, cover them in a different way than we would with you know, people who are doing community digitization events or the like. And we try really hard to not use not say metadata with folks. We try to say description. I think you were going to say something.
Oh, I'll just add that it is on my goals for 2022 to put out some training materials that are geared at non-professionals, and I will definitely be relying on this some to make sure. It's really difficult. It's very difficult. Even when you are pretty convinced that you are doing a good job of using accessible language.
Excuse me. Apparently, I don't know how to unmute myself before I start talking. Katie and Kayla both have some interesting comments if they want to say anything.
I guess I commented first, so I can. No, just thank you. I mean, I think as always, seeing process demonstrated and kind of understanding the parts that came in, it seems so obvious as we talk about it, and all the different spaces that we think about reading comprehension and language levels, and sort of not surprising and also really shocking that it's not considered in so much of the work that we do, where, you know, in an academic institution, really recognizing the assumptions we're making about our own communities most immediately, much less the rest of the world and where our materials go. So I just appreciate it, and gives me some thinking to do about other aspects of our digital presence, whether that's our finding aids in archival collections, or even as we're doing some revamp of our own website, how to really consider this in a different frame.
Yeah, and for me, I was just saying, I think very often in the training that we give around metadata creation, we tell people to think about how their users are going to search for stuff and what kind of language they're going to use. But I've never thought about it as a reading level kind of frame. And I think that this is a good way to frame how we create our records as well. and make them more accessible. I often think that when I look at Library of Congress subject headings, sometimes I'm like, really? This is the word they chose for that? Okay. And like, I'll use it, sure, because it links the things together, but like, how else can I frame this in the record so that a normal person can understand this? Yeah, so I think it's a great way to kind of frame when we're saying you should make your records more user friendly. This is a good way to think about how to do that. So it's not just for our public facing statements, but also for how people access our content and discover our content itself. Yeah.
I did want to add that we have undertaken a project with the New Georgia Encyclopedia to have graduate students in Georgia institutions create online exhibits for us that feature content from our content partners. And, you know, we asked that if they have any experience, you know, writing in an accessible way for the general public. But I don't think that, I'm not necessarily sure that we actually apply this kind of process to what ends up in the exhibit. So that's certainly something that we'll be talking with them about.
I think it would be really interesting to see what adding that to the end of that internship process looks like, if they're to run it through sort of an accessibility meter. I think it'd be very interesting to see what exhibits look like after that.
Yeah, and I think that there's also sort of the tension between the NGE, which is kind of an academic yet supposed to be accessible thing, and sort of the 8th grade reading level. So I think that there's probably some negotiation that needs to happen.
I have a question. It's not really, wasn't part of this presentation, but I noticed in your draft that you have you welcome feedback, and I'm curious what your feedback mechanism looks like. If you ask any specific questions, or if you just ask people to email you. And yeah.
Sure, I think that's a great question, Kayla. And if you guys take a second and go to our homepage, I'm assuming that none of you have been there in the last month. You'll see that when people land on the site, there is a pop-up box, and we got this from, I think, Trove, the National Digital Library of Australia. When you land on the site, they have a box that asks if you want to learn more about it, and then it takes you to more information. So that particular so that's one way to get to be able to do feedback. Hey, Nicole, could you do me a favor? Would you pull up an item record and share the screen? So the other thing is we have a toolbar that's on our item record pages, and you can report content there, and it will take you to a form that we totally cribbed from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Thank you. for allowing that people can fill in. And so I will also add that there's a little bit of context about, okay, if you're reporting this, here's the process, which is we notify the partner organization, we talk with them, and then and pass along any emails or anything. And they are the ones who determine what's going to happen. If it's, and then, you know, there's certain vagaries in there about whether we, you know, we're the hosters of the of the content itself or not. But basically, they determine what they will do. We've had this up for about a month, a little over a month, maybe 6 weeks now, and haven't gotten anything at all. I will also add that there is the ability within the statement to go to a form, and a blank form that allows you to put it, you know, if you're not on the item record and you just want to report something in general, that you can do it there. So that's kind of how we handle that. And because you know, when we were trying to figure out what the reporting mechanism would look like, we looked at a bunch of different places, and I kind of felt like a form would be a little friendlier, and I could be wrong, than just an email popping up. It also gives us a little bit more structure in what we're getting from people. So that was kind of why we decided to go with that. And props to UW Milwaukee for their form. So. So I think we're down to the last 2 minutes. Any other comments, questions, approbations? Well, I guess if nobody has any more comments or anything, you know, thanks for letting us talk about this process. I think we learned a ton from it, and you know, have always are going to incorporate it into our work more generally. Bye, everybody.